Welcome to the Redbird Report, your destination for the latest on the St. Louis Cardinals. Here are your hosts, BK and T-Bone.
It is officially over. The Chris Roycroft experience has come to an end for your St. Louis Cardinals. If I sound happy today, I got to be honest, T-Bone, it's because I am. I was done watching it. Wow. And the Cardinals deserve a lot of credit for going out and making the necessary adjustments to their roster. This is not something that I necessarily think we would have seen at this point a year ago. I remember early in the season, we were doing a Redbird Report, and the Cardinals had a disastrous start to the season in their bullpen. And we went through the numbers, and it was like, man, I'm not sure they actually have a bullpen problem. They have a Ryan Fernandez and Chris Roycroft problem. And because those two are peeing down their leg every other game, it feels like they have a bullpen problem. And so right now, you look at what they've done in the bullpen. Again, they had a really bad weekend this past weekend. I understand that. There's no getting around it. It was a bad weekend. But it was kind of a one-off in terms of that series. Overall, the bullpen's been top 5 in Major League Baseball for most of the last month. Roycroft comes back up. He gets another opportunity. He looked like he has for most of his Major League career. And guess what? The Cardinals made the move. They decide to make a 40-man roster move, which was like advanced calculus under the old regime. And they send out Chris Roycroft, decide to DFA him, and bring up a guy that has had a lot of success up at the AAA level this year after converting from a starter to a reliever in Max Rajcic. I will give them full kudos. Thank you to Chaim Bloom for making the move when you needed to do it, showing some urgency, and getting a look at a pitcher that I think a lot of us have wanted to see. There's still another one down at AAA in Luis Gastelum. Would like to see him as well. But for right now, I like the way that the Cardinals are operating, and it's just the latest move that shows some sense of urgency for a team that demands it right now. They deserve this.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's so refreshing is the team is playing well, so you should be looking to upgrade on from your black holes on your roster, right? They did that in the lineup when they decided to go to Jimmy Crooks. They did that when they said, you know what, enough with the Gorman experience. We're going to bring up Blaze Jordan. Victor Scott's not doing the job. Boom, we're going to put Nathan Church there when he returns from the IL. And as much as Roycroft, they deserve credit for when they tried it with him 3 years ago or whatever it was. It clearly got to the point where it wasn't working, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That sinker moves like crazy. It looks like he's throwing a wiffle ball, but he's constantly giving up hits and giving up runs. And at some point, when you've got guys knocking on the door like Rajcic is and Gastelum is, you got to eventually make the call on one of these guys. And you know what? It's not a guarantee that you lose Roycroft, right? Maybe you still hold out hope that after he gets DFA'd, nobody claims him. You can send him down to the minors. And if he ends up earning his way back into the trust to be put back on the 40-man, then you can make that move. But for right now, it was time to make that move, and I'm glad that they did it, and are going to see if they can find some more internal answers from the right side with their bullpen options.
His stuff reminds me of Drew Verhagen. You remember that, where you'd watch it and you can see, all right, the movement patterns are there. I understand how if you're John Mozeliak, or at the time if you're Michael Gersh, you could look at all of the metrics and you see the movement profile of all of this stuff, and you look at the board and you're like, man, this looks like it should translate really well to the major league level. And then every time he goes out there, he throws a pitch and it gets smashed going in the other direction. And it's the same thing for Chris Roycroft. His experience at the major league level has just not had the success that you would have expected. I think somebody might pick him up. I think there's a real chance that he ends up getting claimed to be a DFA. Yeah, somebody will probably pick him up on waivers. And that's okay. It's okay to miss out on a guy like this who's 29 years old. You've been trying it for 3 years. It's time to try the next guy. And they have somebody that's ready to go. This is also a credit to the organization that they've now developed Max Rajcic to be a real option coming out of the bullpen for them, where they now have somebody else that they can turn to. They can turn their attention to a young, cheap, cost control guy that also has options, so you've got even more flexibility coming out of your pen now.
Yeah, and I think now that you've got these guys here that are performing, this is an area that all teams are always looking to churn through, right, with bullpen arms. And this is what I would always say, and this is why I was actually beating the drum on bullpen turnover about a month into the season. They were a little bit more patient than I was. Man, bullpen arms, they're just, you never know what you're going to get, right? And one year they can be great, the next year they can break. In the case of Roycroft, hadn't been good for 3 years. It was time to see if one of these guys that's been pitching well in the minor leagues was going to be able to come up here. And you know what? If you miss out on Roycroft, for whatever reason, it just didn't work here, right? And I think sometimes as an organization, you have to admit that. And sometimes you end up being right? Like they never were proven wrong on moving on from Dylan Carlson. I think you can argue they weren't really ever proven wrong on moving on from Tyler O'Neill. Now, I get it. Those are position players, but it's the same logic here. At some point, you give a guy a chance. They gave him plenty over the last couple of seasons, and he's just never been able to figure it out here at the major league level. So let's try the new fancy toy that's down in the minor leagues and see if you can get some positive results here, because this is something that can kind of determine, do we need to add a bullpen arm at the deadline? Because if you're a playoff contender, just assume you're shopping for a bullpen arm. Unless you can truly find like 5 or 6 guys that you trust in this bullpen, and they're pretty deep right now. Outside Stanik's one bad game in Minnesota. He's been pretty good of late. You've already got guys like Riley O'Brien, who's kind of iffy on the trust right now, but I think they would lean towards, hey, we still believe in this guy, along with Jojo Romero from the left side, Soriano. Like, they've got plenty of options. The question is, can they get one more into this mix? And that's why I like they're trying this right now.
I like it as well. That's the move they made. There's also a move that they have not made that a lot of Cardinals fans are asking for, and that is Joshua Baez. Joshua Baez in the last 28 days has played 21 baseball games. And in those 21 baseball games, he has a total of 20 extra base hits. That is not a misprint. He has 6 doubles, 2 triples, and 12 home runs in his last 21 games. He is slugging .857, T-Bone, over that stretch. Somehow the last week has even been better when he is slugging 1,200. No, that's not an OPS. His slugging percentage over the last week is 1,200 because he has 5 home runs in his last 4 games. 4 of those came in one night for the Memphis Redbirds. So Joshua Baez is on an absolute heater right now. And he's one of the top prospects in their system, the former second-round pick out of high school. It took a little while for him to get to this place. But now he's hitting the ground running at the AAA level. He also comes with decent defense in the outfield, especially a corner. And he has the ability to run the bases very well as well. He's kind of an athletic freak similar to like a Jordan Walker. He's like 6'4", 200-plus pounds, and hits the crap out of the ball, clearly. A lot of Cardinals fans are ready to see it. Now, this would take some tinkering with the lineup. You would have to either play Joshua Baez in center field, which he technically can do, probably don't want him to do, or you'd have to put Lars Nootbaar into center field for some amount of time, or you only play Joshua Baez and Lars Nootbaar in the lineup on the same day whenever you have Ivan Herrera behind the plate, because then one of them could be as your designated hitter. That's kind of the way that they could make this all work if they decided to bring up Joshua Baez sooner rather than later. T-Bone, are you ready for that? Are you ready to even have that conversation, or are the Cardinals doing this right by continuing to see what he does at the AAA level and extending this thing out to give it more time to breathe?
I'm very antsy to pull the trigger on it, but I don't think you need to do it right now, because I think right now your outfield is fine, and I don't think you need to bring him up here and potentially kind of block playing time from Nathan Church, which I know sounds weird, but Church has been fine defensively in center field. You're winning right now, and in a critical stretch of the season where, hey man, this is where you need to be banking wins, because June gets very tough when it comes to, July gets very tough when it comes to your schedule. I just don't see the need to do it right now, and I love what he's doing down there, and he's been on an incredible tear as you read off those numbers, but I'm not benching Nootbaar. He doesn't profile as a center fielder, and until Nathan Church goes through like a Gorman-esque stretch, I don't find the reason to kind of pull him out of the lineup. I think right now you've got a good balance of offense with defense right now in this lineup that I don't want to kind of, and I'm against some of the numbers when it comes to defense. I think teams do overvalue it. I don't want to pull away from their defense right now, especially up the middle with Church and Wynn the way that they've been playing. So I don't want to put him in center field, a position he's probably not going to be long term. I don't feel comfortable putting Nootbaar in center field for an extended stretch. So I think right now, as long as you remain healthy, I think the plan is Baez is just down at the AAA level and continues to rake. And there are still things he needs to work on, right? Like there's still a lot of swing and miss in his game. Maybe you could continue to hope that he can hone that in. Maybe he never does, but you can at least sell that as, okay, here's what he still needs to work on, because that will not translate particularly well potentially to the big league level. But with Church playing well, with Nootbaar healthy and playing well, I don't see a spot for Baez to come up here and be on this roster right now. I think this is different from the decisions with Church on center, with Blaze Jordan at third, and with Crooks at catcher.
I think it's because of the options, right? Like the alternative for somebody like Blaze Jordan was Nolan Gorman at third base, who was a disaster, an abject failure at the point in which they ultimately made that move. And so, yes, there are defensive questions about Blaze Jordan at third base. I think most of those at this point seem to be less important than they appeared to be previously. I think he's been okay defensively, and that's really all you need. But that was the reason why they could say, defensive questions be damned. This is a move we have to make right now. The alternative is just that bad. Pedro Pages has been kind of similarly bad as a hitter this season. And to be candid, his defense hadn't been as good as it was previously. So when you have somebody like Jimmy Crooks, who's tearing the cover off the baseball down at AAA, has improved his defense and serves as a viable alternative, well, that's how you end up making that switch as well. Your alternatives at the major league level in the outfield right now are fine or good. Jordan Walker's never coming out of this lineup right now. In left field, I feel really comfortable currently about Lars Nootbaar. I would say Nathan Church has been good since his return from the minor league level relative to what the typical expectations would be for a player like that. And let's not forget about the right-handed bat that's currently getting playing time against lefties in the outfield. Nelson Velasquez has been really good for you. So until something among those players that I just mentioned changes, there's no urgency to make any of these moves that are necessary.
Well, and I don't think you're calling him up here to be a platoon bat.
No.
Right? Like, I don't see a scenario where if Velasquez goes cold to that point that you mentioned, because he has been good against lefties, I don't think they're going to call up Baez and say, all right, he's up here to be a platoon bat. When Baez gets here, whenever that day is, whether that's post-deadline, that's a week from today, that's next year, he's going to be a guy they write in pen in that lineup for the time being until they see otherwise that he needs to become a platoon bat. But at this point in his career, whenever he gets called up, he's playing every day. I don't know what their option would be if Velasquez goes cold, but it's not going to be Baez, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this gets us to the next question, which is like, okay, then what do you do? If you're in Chaim Bloom's shoes, this is a good problem to have where you've got too many options for the outfield, specifically for the corner spots. But I think for a lot of people, the reaction to all of this has been, well, this is perfect. You trade Lars Nootbaar at the trade deadline. You bring up Joshua Baez. You're able to get something of substance for Lars Nootbaar. That's probably always been, or at least on day one, I would assume that was probably the plan for them. And now you get to just follow your plan. And it's working the way that everybody would have hoped. You get younger, you get cheaper, you get more athletic in the outfield with more of a power presence from Joshua Baez. I don't subscribe to that belief. I think you just kind of go with this, with Lars Nootbaar in the outfield for now, and see how it looks the rest of the season. If you want to visit those conversations in the offseason, I would be more open to that when you get to, November than I would be right now. But I think Lars Nootbaar is almost too good to turn away from currently. And there's too much of an unknown on how Joshua Baez will translate to the major league level. I know it's exciting. The power is hard to ignore. But you don't have to look too far to see how that can go bad at the major league level. You guys remember that Nolan Gorman guy? Because he was putting up really good numbers down at AAA and in the minor leagues throughout his minor league career with the Cardinals. The power was impossible to ignore. But there were swing and miss questions. There were chase questions. There were questions about how he would translate positionally to the major league level. Sound familiar? All of these are basically the same questions about Joshua Baez. That does not mean that he will become Nolan Gorman at the major league level, but it does mean that's in his range of outcomes. And with that being the case, I would just stick with Lars Nootbaar for the time being, see how this goes the rest of the year, have that depth at AAA in the event that there's any kind of an injury, and that's been a problem for Noot at times in the past, and then see what it looks like in the offseason, have this as an offseason question more than an in-season discussion.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with it. I think if you're Chaim, you just kind of sit on your hands right now, right? You don't make the move to bring up Baez because you don't have the playing time for him. And I personally am not trading Nootbaar at the deadline because, like you said, he's been a much-needed boost. How often over the last, month and a half have we been talking about 5 through 9 in the order? Well, you can cut that to 6 through 9 if you want to worry about the bottom part because Nootbaar's at an 831 OPS since he returned. So I'm not plucking that out of the lineup and then immediately telling Joshua Baez, all right, we're bringing you up here in the midst of a playoff race, and you need to go be Nootbaar. You need to be a guy that's going to have an 800 OPS to help us out because he would probably hit in that 5 spot. They would kind of manipulate the lineup around a little bit, but I think that would be where he would kind of profile best. I'm not doing that to Joshua Baez right now, and I'm not selling on Lars Nootbaar at the deadline when you're in this thing, right? I understand the preseason expectations were, hey, we're going into a build, as ownership called it, and the expectations from the fan base, I think honestly from the front office, were, we're probably not going to be very good. We'll look to trade Nootbaar at the deadline if he gets back healthy and is performing well. Well, we've been playing games. They're a good baseball team. Expectations can change. You can still build while winning baseball games and also trying to improve the Major League roster. So I don't think they're moving on from Nootbaar. Now, maybe they could explore the option of doing like the Bader deal, which is, hey, trade Bader, get a starter that came in, and that deal was Bader for Jordan Montgomery. They might explore that, but I don't know that they're going to be able to find that this year because I think they're going to be more in the rental market, and you're not going to want to overpay by giving away Nootbaar with control. So I say, yeah, if everybody stays healthy, unless Church just goes extremely cold, would I then explore bringing up Baez? But for now, my plan is Baez is going to be in the minor leagues till there's an injury or something goes awry in the outfield with the center field spot.
Yeah, to me, if you're going to move an outfielder at the trade deadline to make one of those kinds of moves, now, I don't know how much value this player has at this point in time, but I think the more likely one would be Victor Scott II because he's been Wally pipped by Nathan Church. Church has just been better than Victor Scott. Now, I think the team might disagree with my assessment on this because they still seem to have a belief in Victor Scott. Now, they wouldn't tell you if they didn't, but they still seem to have some level of belief in him long-term as a center field option. But to me, if you're going to make some kind of a major league 40-man roster move from the outfield for a pitcher for right now, I think to me, Victor Scott would make more sense in that kind of a move. That being said, them going out and bringing up a guy like Max Rajcic, and not doing that with Joshua Baez. For some people, the answer to the question I'm about to ask might be Baez, but who else do they need to get a glimpse of prior to the deadline? Because sometimes teams want to do this where you're going to exhaust your internal options first before you find out, all right, I got to go make a trade for a starter. I got to go make a trade for a reliever. Well, see what you have in your system before you go use assets to then replace him with somebody that may have already been here. I think that Rajcic could be a guy that fits into the bullpen plans, not just for right now, but for the longer term. Gastelum, to me, is another guy that I would like to see get an opportunity at some point within really the next month because you're going to want a little bit of runway prior to the deadline to be able to find out what he can do. And then 2 other guys that I would throw onto this list less urgently, but I'm curious about them. Tink Hintz would be one. He's looked better lately at AAA, and he's been coming out of the bullpen, serving a bit as an opener. I wonder if there's anything there with him. He is already on the 40-man roster, I believe, so there wouldn't have to be necessarily a move there for you. He's interesting. And then from the left side, Bryson Motts. What's he give you if you decide to use him out of the bullpen down the stretch? Is there a real usage there for him? I don't see any other position players that I feel like you need to find out what you've got. They've done a really good job of that on the position player side of things, and you've kind of found who you need. Do you guys, or do you, T-Bone, have any other names that you would throw on that list?
I think it's just the bullpen arms, and I don't even know if I would put Hintz on that list. I get where you're coming from, though. I think that could make some sense. I think it is just Rajcic and Gastelum for me, because I don't even know, like Motts, for example. I don't know that you need to find that one out. That might just be one of those where it's Yahtzee if you end up doing it at post-deadline, and he ends up just taking Brule's spot. But I just think it's those bullpen arms, because I do think there may be one right-handed arm short. And the other thing that could play into this as well, and this is why I don't want to say I'm disappointed it wasn't Gastelum, but Gastelum is the one that I find more intriguing because he's good against lefties down the minors. Can one of these guys, Rajcic or Gastelum, be good against lefties? Because as much as the Cardinals sell this idea of they need 2 lefties in the pen, no, they just need 2 guys that get lefties out. And JoJo's one of them. who's going to be the other guy? Because I think it's become clear the answer is not Burrell. But no, I'm apparently alone on that one. But
you hate Burrell more than I hate Chris Roycroft.
Yeah, no, they're about equal for me. But I just see Burrell and I see him giving up hits left and right. I understand it's soft contact, it's singles. Yeah, that matters. That would be the thing I think they're trying to figure out before you get to the deadline is, do we need to add a bullpen arm onto our shopping list? Because with the rotation, I know some people might say, well, what about like a Quinn Matthews or Dobbins or Motts to go to the rotation? One, you've seen Dobbins. He looks a little bit like what you have already. Motts, you saw him in one appearance, so it's hard to judge that. But what I would say with those guys is I would still shop for a starter, and then if they dethrone one of your starters and end up becoming a weapon for the postseason, that was just an extra bonus, right? I wouldn't plan on that. And I wouldn't say you have to learn and see if you have that right now. I would say you still are looking to add a starter, and if Motts or Matthews ends up becoming just unbelievable and slots in the rotation like Yusevich did for Toronto, then that's just an extra bonus that ends up being, wow, somehow we rolled the dice and ended up being perfect. I just think the guys you need to find answers on are Gastelum and Rajcic. I think those are the only two that I would circle.
And this says what we mentioned at the beginning. The Cardinals have done a good job of churning through this roster. You have found out, all right, yeah, Prieto's not going to be a guy that we're going to build around. He's not somebody that's probably going to help us too much. Hey, Victor Scott II, you got to go down to AAA because we've got better alternatives here at the major league level. Joel Pozo, really liked having you as a bench bat, but the numbers weren't as good as some of the moments were overall. Nolan Gorman, nope, that ain't working for us. Thomas Ajacey, nope, not going to get it done against left-handers, so you can't be here either. That's like half of your 40-man roster that you've churned through, and instead you've turned to guys that are producing. And it's not sexy names, but Jose Fermin's been good. Brian Torres looks the part of a legit utility guy, and he can play literally everywhere on the field for you. Nelson Velasquez has one role, and he's doing it very well. If you have a left-handed pitcher in the game, that guy can mash against him. And that's all you need out of that specific role. He can DH, he can go to the outfield, or he can pinch hit for you. That was the Joel Pozo role. Velasquez is just doing it better with more damage potential. So they've been able to churn through the position player side of things, and now it's time to do that on the bullpen. And this is step one. I think there will be a few more. We'll see how it all ends up going, but I'm highly encouraged by the way that they have gone about maneuvering the roster, whether that's 26 or 40 man throughout the season. Chaim Bloom deserves a lot of credit for that, in my opinion.
And I'll add this. I think this signals that they are going to be a buyer at the deadline if they're in it. And the reason I say that, if this was a true rebuild, we've talked about this before. Who was the internal answer at third base? Like, who was the guy moving forward that you would say was, hey, that guy's probably the third baseman long term? Their answer still would have been Gorman through all the struggles, because even though Blaze is off to the hot start, I still think the long-term goal is not to have him be your starting third baseman. It's to have him as a first base DH type bat that can be at the major league level. If they were just rebuilding and they weren't winning and they had the same record as the Rockies, there's no harm in throwing Gorman out there still. Right? Even if he's in the midst of a 3 for 50, I think they would still be playing him. I still think they would be playing Victor Scott II potentially if they didn't have Nootbaar, who would have then created a roster crunch. I think all of these moves, they kind of work as though 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but they do seem to signal this is 1 foot in of, okay, we are actually trying here because we are better than we expected.
So with that being said, that would signify that they're probably going to be a buyer at this year's trade deadline. We got our first glimpse from some of the national insiders on who the top names should be at this year's trade deadline. We'll pass some of those along, give you our thoughts on the way too early trade deadline candidates next here on the Redbird Report. Byron Buxton. That's the name that stood out to me as I looked at the way too early list of trade candidates for this year's deadline. Now, there were two reasons for that. One, because he is what I think if you're dreaming really big, you want Joshua Baez to eventually become. How realistic is that? Not very. But he's the guy that I think you're hoping for Joshua Baez to become. And so we had the conversation the other day on BK and Ferrario. Would you consider just making that move today of flipping Baez for Buxton? Now, if you want me to be real, I don't think the Twins would do that. I think they would ask for more in this kind of a deal, which speaks to how great Buxton is and also why it's not happening from the St. Louis Cardinals perspective. But that was one of the many names on this list from ESPN.com. It was both Jeff Passan and Kiley McDaniel who put this together. And T-Bone, the Cardinals were associated with basically every starter on the list. Also, the aforementioned Byron Buxton, they were listed as one of the best suitors for him. And strangely, Seiya Suzuki was one of the guys that they were like, hey, what about this bat from the Chicago Cubs who could potentially be of interest to the Cardinals?
Yeah, I don't get where the Suzuki one fits in, but I like it. He's a hell of a hitter, but he ain't gonna be a Cardinal.
So when you looked at this list, T-Bone, let's start big picture. What did you think when you saw the names that are on this list, the names that are tied to the Cardinals, and which direction you think they're most likely to go at this year's trade deadline? Were there any that immediately stood out to you as being like, okay, yeah, those feel like a potential Cardinals target?
Yeah, I immediately went to some of the rental guys that I think could make some sense for the Cardinals, because when you look at starting pitching, though it's valuable across the sport, teams typically don't like to trade for it around the deadline. And if they do, it typically doesn't cost much, especially if it's a rental type arm. Like I go back to what Merrill Kelly got the Diamondbacks last year when they traded him to the Rangers, got them literally nothing. And Kelly's like a 2 or 3 for a rotation in the playoffs. So I saw this list and said, man, there's some intriguing names here. Now, the first one I'm going to bring up might be, he may cost you a little bit more, but he's in the midst of a down year, and that's Freddy Peralta. Freddy Peralta is a guy that I look at and go, that guy would slot in as your number 2 behind Dustin May, and I feel like would give you a pretty good shot no matter who you match up against. Even though he's in the midst of a down year, I don't think he would cost as much, but if he does, then I look at guys like Casey Mize from the Detroit Tigers. Now, he's dealt with some groin injuries, which are weird, but he's put together a very good campaign. I look at him and I go, that's a perfect rental for the St. Louis Cardinals. Comes in, immediately helps you, probably doesn't cost a ton, and while everybody is going to be circling like vultures around the dead meat of the Detroit Tigers, they're all going to be focusing on Skubal. So maybe you can slide in there and get Mize, and if you want to go for control, it could be Joe Ryan as well. I actually think he's the more appealing guy from the Twins than it is Byron Buxton, because I just don't think you need an outfielder. I think you need starting pitching. I think that is clearly where they are going to be trying to target, because they can go in, they can add to the rotation. If they want to go a rental, like I think what Jim Bone wrote up today in The Athletic, which was basically along the lines of, hey, they're probably targeting starting pitching, but they also like the prospects that they have. That screamed to me, okay, so they're looking for a rental, and then the prospects that they have will be the guys that will backfill the rotation going into next season. But if you go out and acquire a starting pitcher, you go Dustin May, insert name that's got decent stuff at number 2, and then you've got McGreevy/Palante going games 3 and 4. Yeah, you're probably not going to be favored depending on the matchup in 3 and 4, but those guys have proven they'll give you a shot. And if you can just improve that number 2 spot, I feel good about you going into a playoff series, and it kicks some of your guys in your rotation out of the bullpen. Right? Like Kyle Leahy. I think we would agree the starting experience hasn't been great, but I would like him in a 2-inning relief role, right? Or an inning relief role when you match him up perfectly against righties. Hey, Matthew Liberatore, yeah, I'm out on your whole, like, hey, he could be 5 and die with swing and miss. I'm out on that. I like him matching up against lefties, though, coming out of my pen. So maybe you don't have to add a bullpen arm at the deadline, because you're going to be adding it by whoever you're kicking out of the rotation.
The Cardinals are actually in a really interesting spot with their bullpen if you look at them from a playoff perspective, because of what you just mentioned there. You could have Kyle Leahy in the bullpen. You could use Quinn Matthews and Bryson Motts and Hunter Dobbins and Matthew Liberatore and Kyle Leahy all as bullpen options for you as you get closer to the postseason. They've got a ton of options. So then it becomes about, do you have a top 4, though, in the rotation that you trust? And that's where I do agree with you. I think that's probably the most realistic spot for them to upgrade. Now, Joe Ryan is probably the top of this tier. I agree with you. I love Joe Ryan. I think he makes a ton of sense for the Cardinals. I don't know what the asking price is going to be, though. I think it's going to be pretty significant.
He's controllable.
That's where you talk about like a Baez level prospect. I don't know that it would be Joshua Baez specifically, but somebody like that for a team like the Minnesota Twins. So my guess is they'll go a tier below that or a couple of tiers below that. You mentioned Casey Mize. I think he makes a ton of sense as well. Rental, very good stuff. Guy that could slide in as that number 2 starter for the Cardinals and could be like a Jordan Montgomery kind of a guy, like an under-the-radar type of name that not a lot of people were thinking about and is like undervalued even relative to his own teammate that's going to be on the market this trade deadline, but I think could be considered one of the top additions at the deadline when you look back on it. And then 2 other guys, both with the Kansas City Royals right now, that I think make some level of sense for the Cardinals. would be Michael Wacha making a return here to St. Louis. The poetry of that would be interesting, and he's got another year of control, and he's just been really good. Like a 3.5 ERA for 4 years running. That's the kind of guy that could slot in again as a number 2 starter. You feel pretty good about him in any of those starts that he's making for you, in the regular season, but then even into the postseason. And then Lugo is the other guy who there are going to be differing beliefs on how good he actually is. And because of that, I don't think he's going to get a ton in return for the Kansas City Royals. But like that's the kind of spot where if you did want to trade Lars Nootbaar, I think like a Noot for Lugo trade could be interesting for both sides because it helps the Royals with something they're missing right now, which is outfield production, and it helps the Cardinals with something they're lacking right now, which is a middle of the rotation kind of a starter. But those, I think that's more the tier you're looking at. Casey Mize, Michael Wacha, Seth Lugo. I think all of those are names that 6 weeks from the trade deadline, I would be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, and I think those controllable arms make more sense than Ryan for the Cardinals, just because I think they will be less of an ask.
Agreed.
Now, and I know the YouTube comments won't like this, but if the ask is, hey, we want Nootbaar to make that happen, I'm out. I'm not plucking from the offense because I'll just use Nootbaar to trade in the offseason.
Interesting. So if the ask for Michael Wacha, if the Royals called and said, hey, we don't want prospects. We've got a lot of prospects. We want to help our team for 2027. We want to be good again next year. And so for you, the only way you're getting Michael Wacha, our target is Lars Nootbaar. You're out. You're just saying, I'm pivoting to somebody else, then I'm not interested in trading.
Yeah, I'm out, and it's 2 reasons. One is because I don't want to pluck from this lineup, because even if you upgrade the rotation, I still think your biggest strength going into October is the depth of that lineup. From 1 through 5, I feel really good, and if things continue the way they have at the bottom part, I feel really good 1 through about 9 at this point with their lineup. So I don't want to be plucking a piece out from that. Now, yes, there is a chance Baez does become very good for the Cardinals, fills in that spot, and you don't even notice the change. I just think that's too much of a risk and too much to ask for from a kid. So I don't want to do that. And then the second thing is, well, I think I can just get an arm that still could be as good as Michael Wacha for less on the market, right? Like I think Casey Mize, you could get him and it wouldn't cost as much because he's a rental. You know, maybe you might be able to get like Robbie Ray from the Giants, and maybe he costs a little bit less, and maybe you're able to fine-tune a little bit of his stuff and make him more of the guy that he was in years prior. So those are the 2 reasons why I would say if Nootbaar is the one that they're asking for in that trade, which I do think makes sense from the Royals' perspective, I would say, hey, look, we're out right now. We can have a conversation in the offseason as to what you'd be willing to give us for Nootbaar, but we're not moving on from him right now while we're in the midst of a playoff race.
So the Royals bring us to the conversation that I wanted to have next, which is why I think both you and I are interested in the Cardinals being buyers at this year's trade deadline. There's no guarantees that this continues for the Cardinals next season. The Royals thought they were a team that was on the ascent. They were a team that was just going to keep going on the up and up because they made some good trades. They have some quality young players, including an absolute superstar in Bobby Witt Jr., one of the best players in the sport. They signed him to a long-term extension. And so they're like, all right, we pieced this thing together around him. We're going to be A-okay. They then go out and sign a couple of guys, and Wacha and Lugo a couple of years ago continue to keep them around. And they felt like this is a good team that should compete for the playoffs once again. It's done anything but. This year, they're 15 games below 500. They are already 10 games back in their own division, and they are looking very likely to be a seller at this year's trade deadline. They're not alone in that regard. The Red Sox thought that they were on the up and up after what happened to them last year, where young guys started to hit. They were on the ascent. The Baltimore Orioles, you remember a couple of years ago, that young core, how is anybody going to stop these guys? Add in a little bit of pitching, it's going to be amazing. The Arizona Diamondbacks, they had one of the best players in Major League Baseball in his first couple of seasons in Corbin Carroll. They went to a World Series, and it hasn't been the same ever since. This stuff changes so quickly in Major League Baseball, and that to me is why you don't just punt on this season and say, hey, our plan was always to compete in 27, 28, 29, so we're not really going to keep trying in 2026, even though they're 40-32 through the first 72 games of the regular season and have a very good shot at this point, a better than 50% chance to reach the postseason. Yeah, but we don't think this team's going to win the World Series, so we're going to stick to our plan and trade Dustin May and trade Lars Nootbaar, trade Riley O'Brien, trade JoJo Romero. I don't believe in that. I think this team has earned the right at this point, assuming that they continue to play the way that they have thus far, to be a buyer at the trade deadline without completely mortgaging your future.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% there, because otherwise, what was the point of us playing the first 72 games at this point of the season if we were just going to say no matter what we were going to sell, right? I think they've proven that they deserve to have some reinforcements added to this roster. And as you read off those teams, like, you can even add more to the list of teams that thought they had a bigger window and it failed. Like, look at the Rangers, for example. Throw them into the conversation. I just think this idea of we're going to have this perfect build where we start off and we sell our assets at the deadline and all those prospects that we get, aren't they great? We'll be good in 3 to 5 years. Yeah, no one has a perfect build.
Who's that actually worked for? Like, I hear all of these examples of teams that got off of the track, and then that's why, like, they're the cautionary tale. And that's fair. Like, some teams end up making stupid moves, don't get me wrong, but who's the team that stayed the course, stayed patient, didn't make any of the moves that would get you off course, and they ended up, like, being paid off because they did that? Is there a team? Because Baltimore is kind of the prototypical team that did that, and look at where it got them. They're 35-40 this year.
I mean, the one team that I could maybe point to and make that argument for would be Atlanta, potentially, because they were mostly homegrown talent, and then they never moved on from them. In fact, they locked them all up and stayed the course. And, you know, you can debate, like, how successful it's been, but they've been in the playoffs most years, and they won a World Series. Now, they won the World Series in their down year, by the way. But I think they would be the one that people could point to.
I would also argue that they did it through different means, in that they locked up Ronald Acuna Jr. to a well below market value contract, and Ozzie Albies to a well below market contract. And without those two critical components to this build, none of the rest of it works the way that it has. And the Cardinals don't have that same luxury with the guys that they have internally.
Yeah, but they're like the only one that I can look at, like, that I'm looking through these organizations and saying, okay, yeah, this is kind of what happened, and then you could argue it was a success, but you're right, it's done a little bit differently. I just think it's too hard to, like, execute a build, especially in baseball, because I think baseball, of the 4 professional sports, is the least predictable year in and year out, because it's just so hard to hit in Major League Baseball, right? I mean, you mentioned Corbin Carroll. Corbin Carroll's a guy that I would have never thought was going to have a year like he did last year, where he didn't hit for the first half. I would have thought that was impossible, yet it happened, right? Like, I would have thought it was impossible for Jordan Walker to go on this unbelievable tear after seeing him the first 2 years, yet it happened.
I mean, I would say that the guy that we've compared Jordan Walker to a lot is Vlad Guerrero Jr., right? In the prospect pedigree, the way that they started their careers, the ground ball issues for Guerrero early in his career. Guerrero last year was an MVP candidate. Guerrero this year has 4 home runs at this point in the season. And he has a .372 slugging percentage, which means that his OPS is, like, below 750. It's worse than J.J. Weatherholt. Vlad Guerrero Jr., again, last year was an MVP candidate. So this stuff can change overnight. And if it does, when it does, everything changes about the way that you're building your roster. So you've got to take advantage when you have the lightning in a bottle that the Cardinals currently feel as though they have.
And again, I agree with what you said. You're not pushing your chips all in, right?
No.
Because you're not there
Don't
as an organization.
Don't trade Raniel Rodriguez.
Yeah, you're not there as an organization. The only time you're ever there as an organization is when you are, like, top 2 in your respective league, right? When you're in the window that the Dodgers are in right now, you're all in, right? You're giving up everything you have to try and get Skubal. They're not there, but they are definitely in a spot to where it is, hey, they should add to their roster just so they can kind of clean up their holes. And who knows what happens when you get to October, right? I think the Dodgers are a little bit different now than, like, what we saw a couple years ago when the Braves kind of just said, hey, what if we kind of piece the outfield together and see if we get hot? But who knows? You may not have to be the team that beats the Dodgers, right? Maybe this happens to be the year where the Brewers somehow actually do it. They have Mizorowski and Harrison. They shove for the first 2 games. Boom, they're up 2-0. They knock them out potentially in the NLDS or wherever it might be. So I think you just clean up your spot and say, let's just give ourselves our best shot, right? We don't have to mortgage any of our top prospects, like you said. We add 1 rotation arm here, and we feel pretty good about where we're at. And this team deserves this, right? Like, these guys in that locker room, you told them at the beginning of the year, hey, we are giving this opportunity to you. Go out there and run with it. Prove that you belong in our core. And not only have they proved they belong in your core, they're winning, and they're the ones that are helping bring back the fans to the stadium right now.
And I think the concern from some fans is, yeah, but then you ended up losing some of these guys on the roster for nothing. And the 2 guys that immediately would be, I would say, pointed out in that regard would be JoJo Romero and Dustin May. JoJo, I've got nothing for. Yeah, you're probably going to lose him for nothing. What you lose him for is the service time. You lost him for quote unquote nothing because you hopefully win with him while he's here. And you're probably not going to get a haul for JoJo Romero at the deadline anyways. He's a lefty specialist. He's not a closer. Those guys get you lottery ticket prospects.
His metrics aren't very good when you peek under the hood right now.
Yeah. Would you get something for him? Absolutely. Would it be something that really changes the course of your future? Probably not. You're getting more of what you already have, which is probably some kind of a future utility guy. And for Dustin May, I reject the premise. You're not going to lose him for nothing. If he continues to pitch the way that he has, the Cardinals will give him the qualifying offer. There would be no reason not to, which means they either get him back again next year for $20 million, or you get a second-round pick next year if he decides to decline the qualifying offer and he ends up signing elsewhere for a pretty significant price. So, yeah, you're not losing him for nothing. It's just JoJo Romero, and if that's the case, so be it. Lars Nootbaar, you can still have conversations about trades in the offseason for him. Any of the other guys currently on the Major League roster, again, you could still have those conversations in the offseason if you really wanted to circle back on them. I think that the Cardinals are in a better spot than just needing to sell off all of these assets at this year's trade deadline. If they want to make the playoffs, though, the next few weeks are a really important stretch for them. We'll talk about what lies ahead, including this series in Kansas City, next here on the Redbird Report. This series in Kansas City is one that the Cardinals should win 2 out of 3 in, at a minimum. Probably should sweep them. The Royals are just a very bad baseball team, man. You guys know this. I'm a Royals fan, grew up in Kansas City. The team's not good. Vinny Pasquantino is hurt right now. They don't hit at all. You're going up against a couple of their worst pitchers that are going to be on the mound against the Cardinals this weekend. And you've got an off day, strangely, on a Saturday, like just lined up right in between. So you'll potentially have a refreshed bullpen for Sunday as well. This is the kind of series that the Cardinals need to take advantage of, in part because of what lies ahead. After this series, things start to get a little more difficult. You're going to have 4 games at home against a team that you're directly competing with for an NL wildcard spot with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Then you've got 3 against Miami. Set that aside here for a second. And then to finish out the first half of the season, prior to the All-Star break, the Cardinals get 3 on the road at Atlanta, one of the best teams in the major leagues this year. 3 on the road at Chicago. God only knows what's going to happen on a 4th of July weekend at Wrigley. Those games are going to be ridiculous. 5 games, yes, 5 games in 4 days against the division-leading Milwaukee Brewers, and then you finish it out with 3 more against one of the best teams in Major League Baseball, the Atlanta Braves. So in that stretch, you've got 6 games against the Atlanta Braves, 3 against the Chicago Cubs, and 5 against the Milwaukee Brewers. Good luck, man. That's going to be tough. If you can just go around 500 in that stretch of games, you're doing really well, which means you're probably not going to be adding up much when it comes to the NL wildcard race. That's why this next stretch right here of 10 games, KC, Arizona, Miami, this is a huge stretch of 10 games for the St. Louis Cardinals. They've got to continue to increase that lead they have in the NL wildcard spot if they want to continue to convince Chaim Bloom that they're a legit contender going into the deadline.
Yeah, if they can go like 6-4, 7-3 in that stretch, that would be huge for them. And we felt that way when the month of June started, because if you've looked at their overall schedule in June, hadn't been a lot of tough competition that they've had to play. You know, they had the one slip up in Minnesota, but overall they're 9-6. So if you're talking about adding another 6 wins there and picking up a 15-win month, that would be huge for them, especially before they start that stretch that you're talking about. And I feel like we say this all the time on the Redbird Report when we look ahead, but it does feel like things are kind of falling into place the way you would prefer if you're the Cardinals, because you go to Kansas City, your worst arm in that series is going tonight against the Royals with Matthew Liberatore. Feel pretty good with McGreevy and May. Feel like they're going to give you a shot to win the next 2 games. To your point, get a fresh bullpen for Sunday. Now, when you run into Arizona, it'll be interesting because their offense is very good, and you're going to run into 2 of their big arms in Rodriguez and Soroka. But I kind of like your chances to at least earn a split there. And then I just think, I know they lost the series in Miami. I think they're a better team than the Miami Marlins. To be fair, we didn't try on one of those games, right? We put out the getaway day lineup in one of those. So, yeah, I think they need to go about 7-3, 6-4 in this stretch. 6-4 at a minimum.
Yep.
7-3, ideally, that would be you winning all 3 of these series.
I really want to see what Libby looks like tonight, because he has been such an up and down pitcher for the Cardinals this year. They have been talking a lot this week, especially Ollie Marmol, with reporters about how much they believe in what Matthew Liberatore is, what he's going to be. And they've been citing a lot of how, like, hey, some of the underlying numbers were really good there for a while, and he's hit a bit of a wall here, which was, according to the team, to be expected because of the transition that he's making as a full-time starter. It's year 2 of that, though. That was the case last year. I just don't know how much that's fair to continue to judge him that way. I want to see some steps in the right direction by Matthew Liberatore. If it continues to look the way that it has the last 2 times that he's gone back out there, it's going to be pretty disappointing if that is the version of Libby that we get for the rest of this season. This is a team that he should be able to pitch well against. The Royals are not good against left-handed pitchers, not good against any pitchers, and his stuff should play well there. It's also a huge ballpark where offense is suppressed in general. So if Libby doesn't pitch well in this game, my alarm bells are going to be ringing just a little bit that there might be more concern here than was immediately let on.
Yeah, First, I'm not buying what the team is selling because they're going to protect their player. I'm not buying he's still transitioning to a starter. That was last year. He had a full offseason to get ready. He has 2 full off seasons now to prepare as a starter. So I'm not buying that. That is the classic, hey, they're going to protect the player like they should as an organization. To me, this start tonight, and you're probably going to disagree with me on this one, you can only learn bad in the start. That lineup is so bad with the Royals that if he doesn't pitch well, there are alarm bells going off, to your point. He pitches well, I'm just going to go, it's the Royals, right? I'll really find out what he looks like when he starts against Arizona at home, because that's a really good lineup that he's going to see. That will be one to where it is, okay, if he pitches well against the Royals, I'm going to view it just like I viewed Leahy's outing against the Padres to wrap up that series. All right, good for you. Had a good start. That's the Padres. That lineup stinks. I would expect you to do that. That's how I feel about Liberatore tonight against the Royals. He pitches well. Okay, good. Nice to see you bounce back. I'm not taking away anything from it because the Royals stink. I want to see what you look like when you go up against a real offense in Arizona, just like when they celebrated him in Milwaukee, right? And that's when I started to go, okay, I'm willing to listen to this because he did shove against a good lineup. He should pitch well against the Royals in that ballpark against that bad of a lineup, though.
Cardinals are in an interesting spot in their season. Just about 6 weeks left to the trade deadline, and that's really the runway that they get, because as a rebuilding team, you have to convince your general manager that you are worthy of reinvesting in as you get closer to the trade deadline. So the next 6 weeks are going to be a heck of a lot of fun to cover here on the Redbird Report. We appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in today, however it is that you do it, whether it's listening or watching. You can always find us on YouTube, youtube.com/101ESPN STL. You can hear T-Bone and myself on BK and Ferrario weekdays from 11 to 2 on 101 ESPN as well. For Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Shout out to both Zane and Noah for doing things on the production side of things today. They always make this video side possible. We'll talk to you guys next week here on the Redbird Report.
Find every episode of the Redbird Report with Brandon Kiley and Tanner Hendrickson on YouTube or at 101ESPN.com.